The president versus the Speaker of the House. President Trump and Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, trading barbs after their failed infrastructure meeting this week.
Another temper tantrum. Again, I pray for the President of the United States. I wish that his family or his administration or his staff would have an intervention for the good of the country. This is not behavior that is rises to the dignity of the office of President of the United States.
I walked into the cabinet room. You had the group, Crying Chuck, Crazy Nancy. I tell you what, I've been watching her, and I have been watching her for a long period of time. She's not the same person.
Joining me now, former House Speaker, Fox News contributor, and collusion author, Newt Gingrich. Mr. Speaker, Newt, great to see you.
Good to see you.
On this day, just what do you make of the back and forth here?
Well, look, I think Pelosi is under great pressure from her radical wing. And apparently went to a meeting earlier and said, gee, let's not try to impeach him, and they blew up. And so she came out and said, well, maybe we'll have to impeach him. And I think Trump just takes it personally. I mean, one of the really big differences between Clinton in this situation and President Trump is Clinton knew he'd done something wrong, and he didn't take it personally. He understood this. He had to live through this. He had to fight it out. But it wasn't he and I could talk like you and I are talking. I think that President Trump looks at all the investigations, all the demands, all the lawsuits, and he's just fed up. And I think this may be the beginning of the next year, that the two of them are just going to be almost impossible to be in the same room and work together.
Where does that lead the country, though? Because, again, this infrastructure plan falls by the wayside. the USMCA passage, the new trade deal with Mexico and Canada, it goes potentially nowhere. There are a lot of things that could have gotten done, potentially, that won't. Look,
Reagan had a good rule, which is that he took things to the country and got the country to then pressure the Congress. If the president works with the people in America who want the trade agreement with Mexico and Canada, they'll bring enough pressure that the Congress will pass it. Even if, Pelosi in the end can't reject the whole country. She can reject Trump. But Trump's job is going to be, don't try to cut a deal with her. He could cut a deal with, I think, Schumer. But I think Pelosi's impossible. So he's got to say, I want enough pressure brought on House members that the House members go to Pelosi and say, we have to pass this. We don't have to like Trump, but we have to pass this. And I think that's what will happen to the Mexican-Canadian agreement.
But is the far left wing in the party, and I mean a Jerry Nadler and an Adam Schiff, the committee chiefs, are they louder and more powerful in terms of their pressure on Nancy Pelosi? Do you think that ultimately they do begin impeachment proceedings again? And you know this well, that it expands the power of investigation by these committees if they start impeachment proceedings, and it narrows the ability of the president to invoke executive privilege, and that's what they want, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's true. I mean, I think, again, they can begin impeachment proceedings, and that's certainly their current argument is we have to do this to get the information. But that's sort of backwards. I mean, normally you get the information and then you start impeaching. And I think that the president will fight it out. President Trump, when he was in business, was very successful at using lawyers and did it all the time. And I think that he is very comfortable. He's got an attorney general now who's very distinguished. I think everybody thinks that Barr is a very smart guy. And I think the attorney general will be pretty happy to defend him and pretty enthusiastic. I mean, Barr's a very combative guy. He doesn't go out and pick a fight, but he's very willing to fight.
And Bill Barr said, the Attorney General said in an interview just this week, he said, I am defending the presidency.
That's
and
right.
The power of the executive branch and trying to prevent it from that power basically being chipped away at by Congress.
Well, and he was the Attorney General for the first President Bush, George H.W. Bush. So he has a real sense of the presidency beyond Trump as a personality. And I think he's also, and you saw this in the memo he wrote before he became Attorney General, I think he's also deeply offended by this whole process by which the deep state tried to destroy the president. And so I think he has no sympathy with the people who have been out trying to destroy the president. just purely on political grounds, not because he did something wrong, but because they were offended that he got elected.
Let's talk about, just to focus on, because again, how many times have we heard the words cover-up from the Democrats just in recent days? Cover-up of what? There was incredible cooperation by this administration with the Mueller report. We can go through all the details that were on that sign in the Rose Garden on Wednesday. Incredible cooperation, and there was no conspiracy, and there was no cooperation between the Trump campaign and Russia. Period. Full stop. So where's the cover-up in this? You can argue about the obstruction part of the Mueller report, but again, if they see something in that, then please feel free to start impeachment proceedings. I think the president's saying, I dare you.
Well, I think he's saying, how dare you, partly because I think he thinks it's totally to their disadvantage. I mean, this whole thing makes the Democrats look mean and vindictive and like they're not trying to help the country. They're just playing politics. But when people ask me about collusion, I always say to them, you mean like deleting 33,000 emails, taking a hammer to destroy your cell phones, using BleachBit to destroy the memory of your computer? You mean that kind of obstruction? And I really wish that Barr would reopen the question of why was the very same team that was trying to undermine Trump, why were they protecting Hillary? To this day, I can't imagine that anybody could delete 33,000 emails and destroy their cell phones and destroy their computer memory and not have a serious investigation.
Well, in terms of, you brought up taking it to the American people, so President Trump has given Bill Barr the authority to declassify information about these Russia probes. What do you think happens in the short run? What will Americans see from this?
Oh, I think Americans are going to see that there was clearly a conspiracy in the deep state to destroy the candidate for president and then the elected president in a way that we've never seen in American history. I mean, to me, as a historian, this is an astonishing moment to realize that the top people at the FBI, the Attorney General had to be involved. There's that famous secret meeting in the airplane with Bill Clinton. And my guess is that the president and the vice president, which gets back to Biden as a candidate, and it raises the question, what did Biden know about all this stuff? I mean, he has two answers. Either he was really an insider and knew it, or they thought he was a doofus and they never let him in the room. But either way, Biden ends up being involved in this conversation. I think people are going to be shocked at the depth of the effort both to protect Hillary and to destroy Trump.
We still, can we show that New Yorker cartoon? We were going to show that. But again, the media, so many people in the media. So this is the magazine's latest cover titled, The Shining. It shows Attorney General Bill Barr, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and Senator Lindsey Graham polishing the president's shoes. But this is the narrative from much of the media during the whole Russia collusion narrative, and now, well, I'm surprised it isn't cover-up related. But
look, I think if you are a liberal, and the New Yorker certainly represents that market, every morning you get up, there are tweets to remind you who the president is, and it drives you crazy. So the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, the New Yorker, they've now had 2.5 years of being tortured. I mean, they can't. This morning they got awake and he was there again. And I think as long as he's president, the left wing of American society will be going nuts.
Real quick, do the Democrats start impeachment proceedings?
I think probably in the end they're pressured to do it. I think it's very hard for Pelosi in the end to stop it.
Does it go to a House vote, full House vote?
It might. I mean, it depends on what the hearings look like and what they think they can do. Remember, if you're from a marginal district, Trump just won a huge victory in a special election in Pennsylvania, which the news media didn't quite notice.
Right.
If he'd lost that seat, that'd have been page one. But he won a big victory. If you're one of those Democrats who's in a swing seat and you have to go back home and get elected again next year, the pressure against you doing anything on impeachment is going to get bigger every week.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House. Take care.